Hello all. In this class, we're going to discuss about the English Revolution, otherwise known as the Glorious Revolution, so which happened in 1689. Before that, we have to actually know about the Restoration. It was about Restoration that I had discussed in the last class. So how it happened and why it happened, and also the events after Restoration which led to the English Revolution of 1689. These are the factors, these are the points I will be discussing in this class. Before that, in the next slide, we can have a round of revision like I have in the slide once again. The House of Stuarts for you, James first, Charles first, Charles second, and James second. So this is a revision, okay? And we've discussed Oliver Cromwell and also how the Restoration happened. So in this class we have to discuss about the Glorious Revolution, but it would be nice for you to have an idea about the House of Stuart. So in the next slide I have a pictorial representation of the rulers. You can see how they ruled, and finally after the Glorious Revolution who came into power, etc. So all these slides you can look later. Now let us see what happened in 1660 after the rule by Oliver Cromwell and a short rule by his son Richard Cromwell. So that was the interregnum. Richard Cromwell was not an able ruler, and we could see how the Convention Parliament invited Charles II, who was in France at that time, to be the ruler of England, and that event came to be known as the Restoration. It restored what? It restored monarchy. So that is what is known as the Restoration. So let us see the process, how it happened. The Convention Parliament invited Charles II. So he was in France at that time. Then you could see that he accepted the throne as per the Declaration of Breda. It was a declaration which had a lot of terms by which the parliament actually enforced a lot of regulations upon the ruler. You can't be like your father, you can't in fact take law into your own, you can take law, you can actually use law according to your interest. That's what the Declaration of Breda told. Now you can see how the people of England, they were so fed up by the Puritan rule of Oliver Cromwell, because it was a rule by force. As I told you earlier, it was a rule by military dictatorship, military dictators, also a rule by soldiers. So by this time people wanted a change. We have to understand how the people of England actually loved monarchy. So you could see how Charles II came to England. It was in fact a 7-hour procession for him to reach the palace. 7 മണിക്കൂർ അത്രയ്ക്കും നീണ്ടൊരു procession ആയിരുന്നു രാജാവിനെ സ്വീകരിക്കാൻ. And he was in fact welcomed by the chorus, God save the king. Okay, God save the king. That's how he got a very warm welcome from the people of England. Now why did it happen so? Because they were fed up by the Puritan discipline. Okay, now regarding Charles II, we've already discussed about his father. You know how he got beheaded. That was Charles first. Now about Charles II. Since he spent a good number of his early years in France, in his appearance and in his mannerism, he was a foreigner. He was 30 years old when he became the ruler of England. Anyway, he was the ablest of Stuart rulers. He was a charmer who could, influence the people in the early years of his life as a king. But his honeymoon period did not last very long. A lot of issues were there. You could see how when he was restored, the House of Lords was also restored. Okay, House of Lords, that house which comprised mainly the nobility. Now what did he do? You could see him taking revenge on those people who were part of the execution of his father Charles I. So many people who had in fact led to the execution, whose actions had led to the execution of his father Charles I, they were brought to trial, and he got them beheaded, executed. Now, we could see how the parliament at this time, however, did not allow the ruler to keep a very strong army. This is where you have to know how the parliament, in fact, tried to control the powers of the ruler. The arbitrary spirit of monarchy, which was there during the time of his father Charles I, could not be seen here. But nevertheless, he continued to have a lot of frictions with the parliament. There were a lot of reasons. In the slide, you can see how he supported mainly Catholics because he spent a lot of his years in France. France was a Catholic country, and you could see how that influence was there. So he supported Catholics, and Parliament, which constituted mainly Anglicans and Puritans, they did not like Charles II supporting Catholics. Now, there were a lot of issues relating to taxation, wars, how he wanted to raise money. He also ruled without parliament for 4 years, 1681 to 85. Now, this period, you have to know this point, how it witnessed the rise of political parties, the rise of the prominent political parties. During the Civil War, we discussed about the Cavaliers and the Roundheads. Cavaliers were the supporters of the ruler, Roundheads, the parliament. Now you can see how there was a change in their nature. You could see how these two groups became well-defined parties, and the Tories, you could see they were loyal to the ruler, the conservative Tories, loyal to the ruler. They were known as the Tories or the Tory party. They had the motto, the king, the church and the land. That means they supported the king, they abide by the laws of the church, and also they consisted of the landed gentry. Landed gentry. So they represented the interest of landed gentry, the conservatives, aristocracy in the Vibhaga. Then we can see the Whigs, but Roundheads in the other version. The Whigs, you can see it comes from the term Whigamore. Short form ആണ് Whigs. Whigamore short ആയിട്ടാണ് Whigs ആവുന്നത്. ഇത് എവിടെ നിന്നാണ് വരുന്നത്? Because you could see how there was a group which opposed the Tories in the House of Commons. ആ ഗ്രൂപ്പിന് they had formed a club known as the Green Ribbon Club. അപ്പം ഹൗസ് ഓഫ് ടോറീസിനെ എതിർത്ത ഗ്രൂപ്പ് ഹൗസ് ഓഫ് കോമൺസിലുള്ള ഒരു വിഭാഗമാണ്, ഒരു ക്ലബ്ബാണ്, ഗ്രീൻ റിബൺ ക്ലബ്. ഗ്രീൻ റിബൺ ക്ലബ്. ഈ ഒരു ആൾക്കാരാണ് പിന്നീട് ദ വിഗ്സ് ആയി മാറുന്നത്, ദ വിഗ്സ്. Now what did they do? They had the motto life, liberty and property. Okay, while the others had king, church and the land, these people had life, liberty and property. So from the name itself, from their motto itself, we know like whom they supported. They mainly supported the capitalist landlords and the wealthy middle class who had money, okay, due to trade. They were very rich. But then they did not have enough privileges and honor like the House of Lords. People who had a lot of ambitions to rise up the social ladder. So they were the capitalist landlords and the wealthy middle class. So you could see how they consisted of people, the parliamentarians predominantly, who were supporting the middle class, the business class. Now, they were annoyed by the pro-Catholic policies of Charles II. They did not like how Charles II, in fact, favored Catholics in numerous instances. Now, though the Whigs and Tories were two parties of different ideological interest, they came together at a common point, that was regarding Catholicism. These two parties, Tories and Whigs, you have to know, hated Catholicism, Catholic religion, and they wanted Puritan or rather Anglican religion. So their parliament, you have to know, consisted mainly about Puritans and Anglicans, and they hated rulers who were pro-Catholics. Charles II being pro-Catholic, he was disliked by the parliamentarians, and they also did not like the idea of king being an absolutist, royal absolutism. So these 2 points, these 2 areas, you could see how these 2 parties, they came together. Okay, now that was the rule of Charles II, that witnessed the rise of political parties, the Tories and the Whigs. Now we can see the case of James II, who was the last Stuart ruler. He was a brother of Charles II. He was a very aged ruler. പ്രായമുണ്ട്. അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ ഒരുപാട് പ്രശ്നങ്ങളുണ്ട്. ഹി വാസ് ഇൻ പവർ ഓൺലി ഫോർ എ വെരി ഫ്യൂ ഇയേഴ്സ്, 1685 to 88, and then the revolution happened. Okay, so regarding his nature, he was a militant Catholic, and he, you could see, went to that extent of allowing Jesuits to proselytize people. Proselytization എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ മതപരിവർത്തനം നടത്താൻ ജെസ്വിറ്റ്സിനെ സമ്മതിച്ചു എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. ജെസ്വിറ്റ്സ് ആരാണ്? കാത്തലിക് people, Catholics, saints. So you could see how he was again an absolutist. He was a supporter of divine right theory. He violated numerous acts, and that was to favor Catholics. Test acts, which you must have studied earlier, I'm not sure, but test acts were passed in order to you could see how test acts were earlier passed to favor Anglicans, but he violated the test acts to favor Catholics. Okay, test acts നേരത്തെ പാസ് ചെയ്തതിൽ കുറച്ച് ആക്റ്റാണ്, അത് കാത്തലിക്സ് ഫേവറബിൾ ആയിരുന്നില്ല. പക്ഷേ ഇവിടെ നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത് ഇദ്ദേഹം ഈ വയലേറ്റഡ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അതിൻ്റെ ടേംസ് മാറ്റിയിട്ട് ആർക്ക് ഫേവർ ചെയ്യാണ്? കാത്തലിക്സിന് ഫേവർ ചെയ്യാണ്. പിന്നെ ഹി കെപ്റ്റ് എ സ്റ്റാൻഡിങ് ആർമി. അദ്ദേഹത്തിന് ഭയം ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ആൻഡ് he in fact kept a very strong standing army. This in fact created that feeling of suspicion in the minds of parliamentarians. Why was the king keeping a very strong army? Was the king actually planning to attack parliament? കാരണം ഇവരെ വിശ്വാസമില്ല. There were people, many times there were instances when the rulers, took law according to their own interest. So why did the king keep a strong army in spite of the opposition from the people and the parliament? So that was there. Then he misused suspending and dispensing powers. There were powers which the ruler suspended to favor his own people, Catholics. In the same way, dispensing powers, which you could see how rules and laws were diluted again to favor people whom he wanted. So suspending and dispensing powers got misused by James II. Then you could see how there were two prominent regulations which were passed, again favoring Catholics. This was the Declaration of Indulgence in 1687 and another one in 1688. Okay, so the first declaration in 1687, second declaration 1688, which he enforced to be read in churches, and these again supported Catholics, these declarations. So by this time, Parliament, they had this fear why the ruler in fact was coming up with such a lot of pro-Catholic reforms. Okay, 1687, 1688, and he relaxed all the rules for Catholics. Now when the second declaration, 1688 declaration, he forced that to be read in the churches. There were 7 bishops who did not read these declarations in their churches. So he he subjected them to seditious trial, these 7 bishops. So again, ഇത്തരത്തിലുള്ള അതായത് ഈ ഇദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ സെക്കൻഡ് ഡിക്ലറേഷൻ വായിക്കാത്ത 7 ബിഷപ്പുമാരെ, കാത്തലിക് ബിഷപ്സിന്, ആംഗ്ലിക്കൻ ബിഷപ്സിനെ ഇദ്ദേഹം വളരെ മോശമായിട്ട് ട്രീറ്റ് ചെയ്യാണ്. ഓക്കെ, അപ്പോൾ അവരെ ഈ ആംഗ്ലിക്കൻ ബിഷപ്സിനെ ദേ വെയർ ഇൻ ഫാക്ട് ഫോഴ്സ്ഡ് ടു ഫേസ് ട്രയൽസ്. ആംഗ്ലിക്കൻ ബിഷപ്സിന് എന്തിനാണ്? why did they actually oppose these declaration? These 7 Anglican bishops did not like the idea of declaration of 1688, which favored Catholics being read in the churches. So you could see how this was another very important event which stirred a hornet's nest in 1688. So by this time, Parliament, they were kind of fed up with the rule of James II, especially second declaration of 1688, which he wanted to be read in the churches. There were 7 Anglican bishops who refused to read it out in their churches. He charged them with sedition, and that event in fact led to a situation where people started hating the ruler so much. Now, you could see that James II's rule witnessed persistent struggles between the king and the parliament. The Tories and the Whigs fought against the ruler for numerous instances. Tories and Whigs, as I told you earlier, they came together at a point when the king supported Catholics. though they were of different ideologies. ഇവർ രണ്ടുപേരും ഒരുമിച്ച് വരുന്ന ഒരു പോയിന്റ് എപ്പോഴാണ്? രാജാവ് പ്രോ കാത്തലിക് റിഫോംസ് ചെയ്യുമ്പോഴായിരുന്നു. ഓക്കെ, നൗ however, these pro-Catholic reforms were not the immediate causes for the revolution. അതായിരുന്നില്ല കാരണം. കാരണം എന്താണെന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ, ദിസ് ഏജ്ഡ് റൂളർ 1688 അദ്ദേഹം ഗോട്ട് എ സൺ, അദ്ദേഹത്തിന് ഒരു ആൺകുട്ടി പറഞ്ഞു. അതാണ് റീസൺ. അതെന്തുകൊണ്ടായിരിക്കും അതൊരു റീസണായി മാറുന്നത്? ഈ കുഞ്ഞ് എന്തായാലും ഒരു കാത്തലിക് ആയിട്ട് മാത്രമേ വളരുള്ളൂ. അപ്പം ഇതിനു മുമ്പേ ഇവർ വിശ്വസിച്ചിരുന്നത് എന്താ വെച്ചാൽ, സിൻസ് ഹി ഡിഡ് നോട്ട് ഹാവ് മെയിൽ എയർസ്, ഹിസ് പ്രൊട്ടസ്റ്റന്റ് ഡോട്ടേഴ്സ് either Mary or Anne would become a successor. That's what the parliament thought. ഇതിനെപ്പോഴും കല്യാണം കഴിഞ്ഞ് പോയിട്ടുണ്ട്, ക്വീൻ ആൻഡ് ക്വീൻ മേരി. പക്ഷേ ഇവർ രണ്ടാളും പ്രോട്ടസ്റ്റൻസ് ആണ്. സോ ദിസ് ഇസ് സോ സർപ്രൈസിങ്, വെയർ അച്ഛൻ കാത്തലിക് ആണ്, മക്കൾ പ്രോട്ടസ്റ്റൻസ് ആണ്. മക്കൾ കല്യാണം കഴിക്കുന്നവർ പ്രോട്ടസ്റ്റൻസ് ആണ്. സോ മേരി ആൻഡ് ആൻ പ്രോട്ടസ്റ്റൻസ്. ജെയിംസ് സെക്കൻഡ് എന്താണ്? കാത്തലിക് ആണ്. വി കുഡ് സീ ഹൗ ദ റിലീജിയസ് ഹിസ്റ്ററി വാസ് സോ മച്ച് എ പാർട്ട് ഓഫ് പൊളിറ്റിക്കൽ turmoil in England. That was so strange when father was a Catholic and daughters were Protestants. So Parliament hoped that ഈ വയസ്സനായ രാജാവ് മരിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ പ്രൊട്ടസ്റ്റന്റിസം ആണ് വരിക. കാരണം പാർലമെന്റ് കൺസിസ്റ്റഡ് ഓഫ് മെയിൻലി ആംഗ്ലിക്കൻസ് ആൻഡ് പ്യൂരിറ്റൻസ് ഹു വർ പ്രൊട്ടസ്റ്റന്റ്സ്, ആൻഡ് ദേ തോട്ട് ദാറ്റ് one of these daughters would become the ruler. But what happened? 1688 ഒരു കുഞ്ഞ് ജനിച്ചു, ആൺകുഞ്ഞ് ജനിച്ചു. അപ്പോൾ ആൺകുഞ്ഞായതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും അച്ഛനെ പോലെ തന്നെയാണ് വളരാൻ സാധ്യതയുള്ളത്. ഡെഫിനറ്റ്ലി ജെയിംസ് സെക്കൻഡ് വുഡ് റേസ് ഹിം ആസ് എ കാത്തലിക്. ഇറ്റ് വാസ് ദിസ് പെർട്ടിക്കുലർ ഫിയർ, ഈ ഒരു ഭയമാണ് പാർലമെൻറ്റിന് ഒരുമിപ്പിക്കുന്നത്. ടോറീസ് ആൻഡ് വിക്സ് കെയിം ടുഗെദർ. ഓക്കെ, ആൻഡ് വാട്ട് ഡിഡ് ദേ ഡു? They wanted to remove James II from power. They kept aside all factionalism. They had different economic interests, all were kept aside, and they decided to come together. Now, what did they do? They invited Mary, who was a daughter of James II. കല്യാണം കഴിഞ്ഞ് പോയതാണ്. അവരുടെ ഹസ്ബൻഡാണ് വില്യം ഓഫ് ഓറഞ്ച്. He was Protestant. So they were jointly invited to be the rulers of England. So James II by this time did not have the support of anybody, not the rulers, not the nobility, not the common people. So he had to flee from his palace. He fled to France in 1688, and that's how the revolution happened. And you could see how the throne was offered jointly to William and Mary. It was a bloodless revolution, and this is the English Revolution, 1688-89. And you could see how it was called the Glorious Revolution by the English historians. Now, after they became the rulers jointly as Queen Mary and King William of this particular dynasty, William of Orange, after they jointly accepted the throne, you could see how the Parliament made them sign a charter. That was the Bill of Rights. This charter is considered to be the most important result of the Glorious Revolution, Bill of Rights. So what actually was the intention of the Parliament? You could see how with this Bill of Rights, there were lots of terms which William and Mary had to agree. One was regarding restricted monarchy. Restricted monarchy means they could not rule as absolutist. They always had to consult the parliament. So that was a limited monarchy, and there were a set of laws which they had to abide by. They had to consult the parliament. So you could call it as constitutional monarchy. So the rights which their ancestors had, these two people did not have, William and Mary. So that is the restricted monarchy. Then you could see how the parliament again said that a lot of rights that the people had, people wanted a lot of rights, including the freedom of speech, So you can see how this particular Bill of Rights actually ended. In this line you can see how it ended absolute monarchy. Okay, and also ushered in constitutional monarchy. Constitutional monarchy എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഒരു ഭരണഘടന പോലെ ഒരു സംഭവം ഉണ്ട്, ഒരു കോഡ്. ഇത് പ്രകാരം രാജാവ് ഭരിക്കണം. അതിനാണ് കോൺസ്റ്റിറ്റ്യൂഷണൽ മൊണാർക്കി എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. And you can see that it was with the Bill of Rights that parliamentary democracy gradually evolved in England. Democracy of the parliament gradually evolved in England. Because you could see how the parliament made sure that elections were held to various bodies. There was again the idea of universal suffrage, which gradually got implemented. Universal suffrage എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ adults ആയ എല്ലാവർക്കും വോട്ട് ചെയ്യാനുള്ള ഉടനെ മെയിൽസ് ആൻഡ് ഫീമെയിൽസ് വോട്ട് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്നില്ല, പക്ഷെ സ്റ്റിൽ ഇറ്റ് വാസ് എ ലോങ് പ്രോസസ് which got completed only in 1928 when women also got voting rights. പക്ഷെ എന്നിരുന്നാലും യൂണിവേഴ്സൽ സഫ്രേജ് എന്ന ഐഡിയ മുന്നോട്ട് വരുന്നത് ഈ ഒരു റെവല്യൂഷന് ശേഷമാണ്. ഇറ്റ് വാസ് വിത്ത് ദ ബിൽ ഓഫ് റൈറ്റ്സ്. It ensured Protestant succession. This is again a very important point that you have to remember. Protestant succession എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ എന്താണ്? അതായത് ഇനി മുതൽ ഇംഗ്ലണ്ടിൻ്റെ ത്രോണിൽ ഇരിക്കാൻ പ്രൊട്ടസ്റ്റൻസിന് മാത്രമേ അധികാരമുള്ളൂ. ദാറ്റ് മീൻസ് നോ കാത്തലിക് വുഡ് ബിക്കം ദ റൂളർ ഓഫ് ഇംഗ്ലണ്ട്. Protestant succession. Okay, so what does that mean? ഇനി ഒരു കാത്തലിക്കും ഇംഗ്ലണ്ടിൻ്റെ രാജാവോ രാജ്ഞിയാവില്ല. ഇപ്പോഴത്തെ റൂളേഴ്സ് എടുത്താലും നിങ്ങൾക്കറിയാം ദി ആർ പ്രൊട്ടസ്റ്റൻസ്. സോ ടിൽ നൗ ദി ഇൻ ഫാക്ട് സ്റ്റുഡ് ബൈ ദിസ് ബിൽ ഓഫ് റൈറ്റ്സ്. ഈ ബിൽ ഓഫ് റൈറ്റ്സ് പ്രകാരമാണ് ഈ ഒരു രാജാവിനെ രാജ്ഞിനെ അവർ തീരുമാനിക്കുന്നത്. പിന്നെ ഇറ്റ് എൻഡഡ്, as a next point you can say, it ended the long drawn struggle between the king and parliament. രാജാവും പാർലമെന്റ് തമ്മിലുള്ള വടംവലിനെ ചൊല്ലിയിട്ടാണ് ഇത്രയും കാലം പ്രശ്നം ഉണ്ടായത്. ഹൗസ് ഓഫ് സ്റ്റുവർട്സ് വിറ്റ്നസ് ദാറ്റ്, ഓൾ ദി റൂളേഴ്സ് വിറ്റ്നസ്. അതിനൊരു പരിഹാരം അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു ഏകദേശം ഒരു എൻഡ് കണ്ടു എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. The final triumph of the parliament. You can see the king was, not a puppet, but you can see how king's powers got limited. So here it was a triumph of the parliament. It also gave a lot of space for commercial and industrial capitalism to grow. That means parliament consisted mainly of the House of Commons, especially the business class, the money, the traders. So they brought in a lot of changes. You could see how commercial revolution happened. There again industrial capitalism, industrial revolution happened. So they were able to assert their power and privileges. They had the money. Now they started enjoying power to the parliament. Industrial capitalism എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഒരു point that was in the economic zone, that too happened. Okay, so general ആയിട്ട് പറയുമ്പോൾ in this slide you can see how it actually transformed the social and economic life of England. ഈ ഒരു റെവല്യൂഷൻ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അതിനുശേഷം വന്ന ബിൽ ഓഫ് റൈറ്റ്സ് കാര്യമായ മാറ്റമാണ് ഉണ്ടാകുന്നത് റിഗാർഡിംഗ് ദ സോഷ്യൽ ആൻഡ് ഇക്കണോമിക് ലൈഫ്. ഇറ്റ് ഫേവേർഡ് ദ ഗ്രോത്ത് ഓഫ് ക്യാപിറ്റലിസം. മുതലാളിത്ത വ്യവസ്ഥിതി, that in fact got a boost with this revolution and the Bill of Rights. These are the results, and these results are very important. So the results which happened after Glorious Revolution with the Bill of Rights, we're discussing that now. Now the Bill of Rights was in fact a charter which inspired many revolutions later. You can see how even the French Revolution, American War of Independence, which happened a century later, got inspiration from this particular revolution. കാരണം ഒരു രാജാവ് നല്ലതല്ലെങ്കിൽ മാറ്റാം എന്ന് ഉള്ളൊരു എക്സാമ്പിളാണ് ഇവിടെ കാണിക്കുന്നത്. സോ ത്രൂ എ റെവല്യൂഷൻ ദാറ്റ് കുഡ് ഹാപ്പൻ എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. It influenced thinkers, philosophers like Voltaire and Thomas Paine. Voltaire നമുക്കറിയാം ഫ്രഞ്ച് റെവല്യൂഷൻ്റെ പിറകിലുള്ള ചാലകശക്തിയായിരുന്നു. തോമസ് പെയിൻ അമേരിക്കൻ വാർ ഓഫ് ഇൻഡിപെൻഡൻസ്. ഇത്തരത്തിലുള്ള ആൾക്കാർക്ക് ഒരു പ്രചോദനം എന്ന നിലയ്ക്കാണ് നിലകൊള്ളുന്നത്. Okay, now the last slide. So you can see the Glorious Revolution happened. The Bill of Rights was drafted in 1689. So there is this question which you have to ponder over. Was the revolution truly glorious? നമ്മളിപ്പം ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് ചരിത്രകാരന്മാരും ഒക്കെ എഴുതിയ ബുക്കുകളാണ് നമ്മൾ അധികം വായിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളത്. അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ അതിനെ they try to call it as glorious. But here we have to actually analyze, was it really glorious? The other names are, Palace Revolution. ഒരു പാലസ് ആയിട്ട് ചുറ്റിപ്പറ്റത് കൊണ്ട് ഒരു പേരുണ്ട് പാലസ് റെവല്യൂഷൻ. പിന്നെയുള്ളത് ബ്ലഡ്ലെസ് റെവല്യൂഷൻ. ദർ വാസ് നോട്ട് മച്ച് ബ്ലഡ് ഷെഡ് എന്നാണ് അവർ അവകാശപ്പെടുന്നത്. അപ്പം അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ ഇതിനാണ് 3 പേരുകളാണ് പൊതുവെ അറിയപ്പെടുന്നത്. നമ്മളിവിടെ നോക്കാൻ പോകുന്നത് വാസ് ഇറ്റ് റിയലി ഗ്ലോറിയസ്. അപ്പം നമ്മൾ പറയേണ്ടത് ദർ ഇസ് നത്തിങ് ടു ഗ്ലോറിഫൈ വെൻ യു ആക്ച്വലി അനലൈസ്. ഒരു രാജാവ് മാറ്റുന്നു, he fled to France, James II. പകരം അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ മരുമകനും മകളും വരുന്നു. വാട്ട് ഇസ് എ ചേഞ്ച് ദെൻ ആഫ്റ്റർ ഓൾ? That's the question which you can think over. So the achievements were limited in scope. From a critique's point of view, the achievements were limited in scope. It was narrowly political and did nothing to change the social abuses which prevailed in England. But it was not a mass revolution. The French Revolution, you must have studied that in school. It was a mass revolution which involved people. Here the people did not know the change of guard, change of power. They were totally uninvolved. But in the case of French Revolution, all the segments of society participated. That sort of a participation from the people cannot be seen in this case. So you can say that it was not a mass revolution. Then why are you glorifying it? Then you can also say from the critical point of view that it was a feudal revolution. It was in fact a feudal middle class collaboration which had a lot of selfish interest. Again, ഇത് ഒരു ക്രിട്ടിക്കൽ ആംഗിളിൽ കൂടെ കാണുമ്പം ചിന്തിക്കാവുന്നതാണ്. ഇറ്റ് പുട്ട് ദ സ്റ്റേറ്റ് ഇൻ ദ ഹാൻഡ്സ് ഓഫ് ദ വെൽതി ക്ലാസ്. അപ്പം എന്താണ് മാറ്റം ഉണ്ടായത്? Again, the rich traders, the bourgeois, they took control of their affairs. So how did the common people benefit? They did not benefit at all. So ഇങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ പ്രശ്നങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടാകുമ്പോൾ how can this revolution can be called glorious revolution? What is there to glorify in this? Bloodless ആണ്, that is again not true എന്ന് പറയുന്നവരുണ്ട്. കാരണം much blood was shed in various parts എന്ന് പറയുന്നുണ്ട്. പക്ഷെ എന്നിരുന്നാലും glorious എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് because this was written by English historians, that is why they glorified it. Okay, so there is nothing to glorify എന്നുള്ളത് വേണമെങ്കിൽ നമുക്ക് പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് അവസാനിപ്പിക്കും. So that is about the glorious revolution and the Bill of Rights which happened later. Okay, the Bill of Rights എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ കാര്യമായ മാറ്റങ്ങൾ, limited monarchy, Protestant succession. Okay, and the triumph of parliament. These 3 points you have to remember. And moreover, it changed a lot of things in the economic and social setup. And the result if we don't support the critics.